What if the one soldier everyone overlooks is the only one who can save them all? What if the quietest voice in the storm is the one that roars loudest when everything falls apart? In the dust-choked valleys of the Karengal, they called Corporal Eva Rostova Shadow, not out of respect, but because she barely seemed to exist. A forward observer attached to a line company, her job was to be eyes, not a fist. She was small, coiled tight with a discipline that made the grizzled grunts uncomfortable. They saw a ghost, haunted by a past she never spoke of, a bombed-out marketplace, the phantom smell of smoke, the faces of a family she was the last to see. Her world was maintaining comms, cleaning optics, and enduring the casual dismissiveness of men like Major Cade Jennings. He saw her as a quota, a box ticked for diversity in a world he believed belonged to men forged in fire, not girls haunted by ghosts. Shadow, he'd sneer during briefings, the word dripping with condescension. Make sure you don't get lost in your own. The laughter that followed was always hollow, but it stung nonetheless. Eva said nothing. She simply cleaned her rifle, her knuckles white, her focus absolute. Her silence was a fortress, her discipline a weapon they couldn't comprehend. She wasn't just hiding from her past, she was sharpening herself against its jagged edges, waiting for a moment that she prayed would never come. Colonel Marcus Thorne saw only reports. Rostova, Eva. Service record, exemplary, unremarkable. A support asset. He was a man carved from the granite of command, his face a roadmap of old wars and lost soldiers. He carried the weight of every dog tag he'd ever sent home, a burden that had sandblasted all softness from his demeanor. He trusted systems, chain of command, and the brutal calculus of war. He had no time for ghosts or shadows. Not yet. He didn't see the way Eva's eyes tracked the flight of a distant kestrel, calculating windage and drift out of pure instinct. He didn't see how she memorized the ridgelines, not as terrain, but as a three-dimensional battle space of angles and exposures. They saw a quiet woman in oversized fatigues. They had no idea they were standing next to a storm, leashed and waiting. The attack came at dusk, a sudden, violent eruption that turned the valley into a cauldron of fire. RPGs slammed into the command post, shredding the comms tent and turning the air thick with cordite and screams. The command net collapsed into chaos, static, panicked shouts, broken calls for support. They were blind, deaf, and bleeding out. Major Jennings, his face pale with shock, fumbled with a backup radio, his voice a high-pitched crackle of useless orders. Where is the fire coming from? Somebody get me eyes on. But the eyes were dead, the forward scouts silenced in the initial barrage. From her forgotten corner of the trench line, Eva Rostova watched the muzzle flashes paint the opposing ridge. It wasn't a random assault, it was a coordinated kill box. She saw the pattern, the rhythm of the machine guns pinning them down while mortar teams walked their rounds toward the aid station. Her training, her instincts, her entire being screamed a single, clear truth. While Jennings panicked, Eva moved. She crawled to a battered field radio, its primary antenna sheared off, and jury-rigged a connection with a length of commo wire. Ignoring the chaos, she keyed the handset, switching to an encrypted command frequency Thorne monitored miles away. Her voice cut through the static, impossibly calm, a sliver of ice in a raging fire. All call signs, this is Shadow. Break. Hostile mortar team, grid 3-1, Niner, 4-7-7. Danger close. Fire for effect. There was a pause. A disbelieving voice from the Tactical Operations Center answered. Unidentified station, who is this? But Colonel Thorne, listening intently, recognized something beyond the call sign. He heard the absence of fear. He heard precision. Do it, Thorne commanded his fire direction officer. Fire that mission now. The sky ripped open. A salvo of friendly artillery screamed overhead and slammed into the ridgeline with the force of a god's hammer. The enemy mortars went silent. Eva didn't wait for confirmation. Machine gun nest, east ridge, second crevice from the peak. Suppressing. Need air support on that position, she continued to call, her voice a metronome of destruction, guiding steel and fire with surgical accuracy. She wasn't just seeing the battle, she was conducting it, a maestro of violence from a muddy hole in the ground. When the last echo of gunfire faded, leaving only the cries of the wounded, an unnatural quiet fell over the valley. The ambush was broken. Thorne's voice came over the net, hard as flint. Who the hell is Shadow? Back at the shattered outpost, Jennings stared at Eva, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. He couldn't comprehend it. The woman he'd dismissed, the ghost, had just saved them all. Slowly, a dusty sergeant pointed a trembling finger toward Eva Rostova, who was calmly cleaning the dirt from her radio handset. Thorne arrived by helicopter an hour later, the rotor wash kicking up a storm of red dust. He strode into the makeshift command post, his eyes sweeping over the carnage before landing on Eva. He saw the grime on her face, the exhaustion in her posture, but also the unwavering steel in her gaze. "Your Shadow," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Corporal Rostova, sir," she replied, her voice steady. Jennings stepped forward, trying to reclaim his authority. "Colonel, it was a chaotic situation." The corporal acted outside the chain of command. Thorne silenced him with a single, withering glare. "Major, your chain of command was screaming for a medic on an open net. This corporal was fighting a war." He turned back to Eva, his gaze intense, searching. He saw more than a soldier, he saw an instrument. A weapon. "Where did you learn to call fire like that?" he asked, his voice softer now. "My father, sir," she said quietly. "He was a scout sniper. He taught me to see." Thorne nodded slowly. The pieces were clicking into place. This wasn't just a fluke. This was talent. Raw, untamed, and wasted in a support role. "Pack your gear, Corporal," Thorne ordered. "You're with me." He was pulling her into the Wolf Pack, his elite Phantom Recon unit. The team was a collection of legends, hard men who had fought in every hellhole on the planet. Their leader, Sergeant Gunny Miller, a veteran with eyes that had seen too much, looked Eva up and down with open skepticism. "She's a liability, Colonel." Thorne's response was to toss Eva a rifle, an M110 sniper system. Prove him wrong. The test was on a remote, windswept range. The target was a steel plate, barely visible at 1,000 meters. Jennings had come along, ostensibly to observe, but truly to watch her fail. "Let's see what the ghost can do," he muttered to Gunny. Eva ignored them. She settled behind the rifle, the cold metal a familiar comfort. The world dissolved. There was only the breath, the scope, the trigger, and the math. She exhaled slowly, her fingers squeezing with microscopic precision. The rifle bucked. A second later, a faint ping echoed back across the range. She fired again. Ping. And again. And again. 5 shots. Gunny looked through his spotting scope, his jaw tight. He lowered it, a look of stunned disbelief on his face. "Colonel," he said, his voice a low rasp. "You need to see this." Thorne looked. On the distant plate, there were not 5 holes. There was one, slightly ragged hole in the dead center of the steel. Jennings was speechless. Gunny Miller simply walked over to Eva, took the rifle from her, and said, "Welcome to the Phantoms, Shadow." Her first mission was a baptism by fire. Deep in hostile territory, tasked with eliminating a high-value target, their plan fell apart. A spotter they hadn't seen, an ambush they hadn't anticipated. They were pinned down in a rocky gorge, a hornet's nest of enemy fire erupting around them. "We're compromised." Gunny yelled over the comms. "We have to pull back." But there was nowhere to go. They were trapped. From his command center, Thorne listened, his knuckles white. Jennings stood behind him, a venomous smile playing on his lips. "I told you she wasn't ready," he whispered, loud enough for the staff to hear. But Eva was already moving. While the others laid down suppressive fire, she found an impossible climb, a sheer rock face that offered a sliver of an angle on the enemy's position. Her movements were fluid, silent, a phantom ascending the stone. Once in position, she became the linchpin. "Gunny, shift fire left. 2 targets, upper ledge." Her rifle cracked, and 2 enemy fighters fell. "Bravo team, pop smoke on my mark. Move to the west wash." She guided them out, her rifle speaking in sharp, deadly sentences, her commands clear and absolute. She wasn't just their overwatch, she was their shepherd, guiding her flock through the valley of death. They made it back, bruised and bloodied, but alive. In the debrief, Gunny Miller didn't mince words. "Shadow saved our asses." End of story. The respect in his voice was real, earned in blood and fire. But as Eva's star began to rise, so too did Major Jennings's resentment. He saw her competence as a direct indictment of his own failures. He couldn't let it stand. He dug into her file, looking for leverage, for weakness. He found none. So he decided to create it. He learned the details of the Phantom's next operation, a critical intel recovery from a compromised safe house. The mission was dangerous, the stakes astronomical. And Jennings saw his chance. Using a secure terminal, he leaked their primary insertion point and route to an insurgent commander, a man known for his brutality. He masked the data trail, making it look like a simple intelligence breach. His plan was simple and vile: the Phantoms would walk into a meat grinder. Thorne would lose his prized asset, his command would be tarnished by failure, and Jennings would be there to pick up the pieces. The trap was sprung with perfect, terrible precision. The moment their boots hit the ground, the world exploded. The enemy was waiting, entrenched, ready. The Phantoms fought with the ferocity of cornered lions, but they were outnumbered, outmaneuvered. Men fell. Gunny took a round to the leg, collapsing with a grunt of pain. The mission was a catastrophic failure. Over the comms, Thorne heard the battle devolve into a desperate fight for survival. He heard Gunny go down. Then, amidst the gunfire and explosions, he heard a new sound. It was a scream. It wasn't born of pain or fear. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. A primal cry of loss and fury that chilled him to the bone. It was Eva. Seeing Gunny fall, seeing her team being torn apart by an enemy that knew their every move, something inside her finally broke. The silent, disciplined soldier was gone, replaced by something fierce and elemental. She moved through the firefight not like a soldier, but like an avenging spirit. Her rifle became an extension of her will, each shot a final judgment. She was a blur of motion, a whisper of death. Thorne listened, mesmerized by the disciplined violence he was hearing. The call sign, Shadow, no longer fit. This was something else. "God help them," he whispered to his comms officer. "She's become a Banshee." The name stuck. From that moment on, she was Shadow Banshee. Wounded, bleeding, but fueled by a cold fire, Eva dragged Gunny behind cover. The ambush was too perfect. They knew where we would be, when we would be there. This wasn't bad luck. It was a betrayal. Using a captured enemy radio, she began her own war. She listened to their chatter, learned their positions, and then began to sow chaos, feeding them false intel, turning their own coordination against them. She lured their main force into a narrow canyon, a natural kill zone she had prepared. When they entered, she triggered a rockslide she had rigged with leftover C4, sealing them in. The fight that followed was brutal, intimate, and final. By the time reinforcements arrived, there was only silence. Eva stood over the wreckage, her rifle smoking, her face a mask of blood and resolve, the intel secured and Gunny Miller alive. Back at base, the truth unraveled quickly. The data from the recovered intel, combined with Eva's report, pointed to only one possibility, an internal leak from a high-level terminal. Thorn ran the logs. The digital fingerprints were undeniable. They led directly to Major Cade Jennings. Thorn confronted him in his office, the evidence laid out on the desk between them. Jennings crumbled, his arrogance dissolving into pathetic denial, then a venomous confession. She had no right. That should have been my command. Thorn's control finally snapped. He lunged across the desk, his hand grabbing Jennings by the collar, lifting him off the floor. For a heartbeat, murder was in his eyes. But he stopped, his fist trembling with restraint. He let Jennings fall to the floor, a broken man. "You're not worth the court-martial," Thorn said, his voice dripping with contempt. "But you're going to get one." Months later, Eva Rostova stood before a new group of phantom recruits, the silver bars of a lieutenant now pinned to her collar. The scars on her face were a testament to her journey. She was no longer a shadow, but a beacon. Colonel Thorn watched from the back of the room, the hard lines of his face softened by a pride he rarely allowed himself to show. She had not only survived the fire, she had been forged by it. They tried to bury her, to dismiss her, to break her. But they didn't understand. You can't bury a seed that is destined to grow. What is the measure of a warrior? Is it the rank on their collar, or the fire in their soul? If this story of resilience and courage moved you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to see it, and comment below with a time you saw an underdog rise to the occasion. Never underestimate the heart of a fighter.